my first guest for Volume 1. For those who know me, this individual needs very little introduction. Such an incredibly generous and caring individual.
Great pleasure and honor to be here and I guess be the first in this great road that you're traveling on, and I'm more than happy to support you in any way I can. I have always called myself, I guess I'm a third generation Japanese Canadian, born and raised in Montreal. So I grew up speaking French and playing hockey, a true Canadian. So I joke about it in here in Japan that I'm bilingual. I'm fully bilingual, but of course they expect it to be Japanese, but no, it's French. My parents were both born and raised in Canada. They are Canadians, but my grandparents, all four grandparents, are Japanese nationals, born in Japan. My name is Mitsuo. I guess as a youth in Montreal, I was always known as Meats. When I moved from Eastern Canada, Montreal, to Western Canada, Edmonton, my name transitioned to Mitts, as in, gloves and mitts.
So I see. So you've gone from being like meats that you would eat, meats to mitts. The mitts that you'd wear. And then now you're in Japan and you're Matsushita-san.
Matsushita-san.
You're like, who?
Who's that? Yeah, I don't know who.
I know that you have felt strongly about thinking back on and capturing and documenting your family history. And I remember my first essay being about wanting to research the Japanese-Canadian internment because I didn't understand why that happened in Canadian politics. It didn't make sense to me given everything I had been learning about, Canadian constitutional protections of equality and diversity. And then I thought, well, wow. And then the history class learning about the internment. And you've mentioned today that you would be open to sharing about your parents' experience of that.
I'm going to say about 10 years ago or so. My father passed away several years ago, but before my father passed away, I traveled down to Toronto where they were living to interview them. So I had no idea growing up any of that history. I didn't understand anything about it. So I interviewed them and I got a lot of that information, which was terrifically insightful. The one thing I think I personally took away from, having talked to my parents about the being interned was that they didn't hold a grudge. They lost all of their rights and possessions. So many Japanese Canadians were entrepreneurs, a lot of them fishermen. They lost their boats, they lost their houses. But the one thing that I remember when I talked to my parents was after it was over, it was okay, let's get on with our life. Let's, go to school or educate or make sure that the children are educated and they're well taken care of. It wasn't a time to say, oh, woe is me. So that was really the biggest thing.
I think that's amazingly generous towards the Canadian government, frankly. When I read that history as a McGill undergrad, I just thought, we have civil and political liberties in a democracy, and yet there was no due process. No. There was no crime committed. There was no proof that any of them had done anything wrong. And the RCMP later revealed that they really had no foundations for suspecting. And so the lack of, the complete violation of democracy and of our values of due process and of having rights and freedoms protected, I found so shameful as a Canadian when I was so young, and just thought that is such a huge shame on our past that we need to learn from and then do better to never have this kind of arbitrary use of racial descent markings on a body.
When I asked my mom about the racism piece, the only piece that I do remember that alluded to a little bit of racism based on, appearance, the idea was to not be Japanese, to speak English, to assimilate to some degree. Obviously, they can't change their appearance with the jet black hair and the dark eyes or whatever.
But to not stand out.
Not to stand out by speaking a different language. So growing up, they spoke to us in English. None of us grew up speaking Japanese.
With your parents?
With my parents. So that's the one maybe downside of all of this, is they're hiding as they grew up. And then as they raised us to be Canadian, culture you experience and who you are, the language and all that doesn't come from your bloodline. And I'm the perfect example. As I said, my parents are both Japanese, born from parents that are Japanese national. But I am the farthest thing from being Japanese. After having lived here for 6 years, I've come to the realization that I am not Japanese, although I am of Japanese bloodline.
So,
I
think
think
culture and language, culturally or
culturally,
linguistically,
linguistically,
mindset.
mindset, mannerisms, and that. And prior to pandemic, of course, standing in a train in Tokyo, I'm looking around and I would pick out foreigners, and I go, oh, there's a foreigner. So there's another foreigner like me. There's another foreigner, white. They're foreigners just like me. Maybe I should go talk to them because they're foreigners and I'm foreigner, and everything is going to be cool. But of course, they're looking at me, going, "Well, there's another Japanese guy. There's another Japanese guy. There's another Japanese woman. There's another." I'm just a Japanese person by appearance.
And so what is the, I mean, for those who maybe don't know the expression, what does the banana and the egg mean?
Banana being me, yellow on the outside, and absolutely white on the inside. In my head, I am white. I am Canadian. I'm not Japanese. But Jackie, white on the outside, but knows and understands completely all of the Japanese mannerisms, culture, language, and everything like that. And I think very much thinks more like a Japanese person than I do, or understands those things. So we are the banana and the egg couple. I joke about this conversation loop that happens where if we sit down at a restaurant or we're at a store or wherever it is, and there's the two of us and there's a Japanese person serving us, in Japan, they're going to talk to the male. They're going to talk to the man. They're not going to talk to Jackie. They're going to talk to me. The conversation would start by looking at me, and the person would start talking, and I'm oblivious to what they're saying, and Jackie will respond. So the conversation goes from the person to me, and then Jackie would respond, and then the person would continue to look at me and talk to me, and then and it would go around like this, right, Jackie? You'd be responding, and I'd be sort of until I get to the point where I'll pull out my phone because I don't want to be part of this. I can't be part of this conversation. It still happens when we go somewhere.
I guess another area where I think really I've enjoyed collaborating with you is we've been doing now 2 big multicultural Lego play festivals in northern Nagano here, featuring all of your collection and your genius around Lego building and design.
There is a huge community of building all kinds of great things. And I think that Lego itself has been, or is, a great tool. In fact, the Lego Corporation has developed kits and education platforms for schools. And there are schools that teach these programs. It's a great way to teach, STEM. Much like reading a book, it's not about just reading the book and getting to the end. It's learning new words or ways to use words and develop that creative part of your brain. Well, I think that's what Lego does too. Sometimes we get stressed about, putting the bricks in and then, oh, I made a mistake. And I always say, it's Lego. No harm, no foul. Take it apart and put it together again. There's no real thing as a mistake, but
there's no failure.
There's no failure. And that's something in Japan where I've sort of seen, back to, jumping back a little bit to work, is that there is this no willingness to stick your neck out because you don't want to fail. You don't want to make that mistake.
It kind of takes away the space of experimentation and play out of work that I think could drive innovation, but also enjoyment in the journey of the work.
Right? And if you don't like it, take it apart and start over.
On that amazing takeaway note, I mean, I think if we can all certainly find that space of, I guess, play, innovation, using our diversities, playing to our strengths, but also learning to be open to other people's teachings and their diversities that can help us evolve.
I hope that your listeners here can take away a little bit of the few bits that I've shared and be of interest to, whether it be something as dark as the Japanese internment or something as fun as the Lego, the Lego play that we do here in Chikuma.
Excellent.